"Get your hands off that weapon!" The words erupted like a thunderclap across the Navy SEAL armory, freezing 50 operators mid-motion. Oil-stained rags hung in suspended air. Bolts and firing pins lay half-cleaned on mats. Conversations died on lips. Commander Rick Morrison's voice carried the weight of decades in uniform, unyielding, commanding, lethal in its certainty. The object of his fury did not even blink. The blonde maintenance worker knelt in front of the Barrett .50 caliber rifle, her cloth gliding across the barrel with a precision that seemed almost ritualistic. She did not look up, nor falter, nor rush. She moved as though the command had never been spoken, as though the furious man filling the doorway did not exist. Morrison's massive frame was outlined by the glow of the corridor lights behind him. 6'4", broad shoulders straining against his uniform, jaw clenched tight enough to crack stone. His hand hovered near his sidearm, not drawn, but close enough to remind everyone of who held authority here. She was the opposite in every conceivable way. Barely 5'4", her frame lost in standard-issue maintenance coveralls, her light brown hair tied back without effort at beauty, her posture unthreatening. She seemed almost fragile compared to the lethal machines surrounding her. And yet, her hands moved with a confidence no fragility could explain. The silence stretched. 50 SEALs shifted in their seats, their curiosity overwhelming their routine. They had returned early from morning drills, sweaty and restless, only to stumble into a spectacle. A civilian woman in their sacred armory, cleaning a weapon she had no clearance to touch. Morrison's voice dropped into a growl. "This is a restricted area for qualified personnel. You are not authorized to so much as breathe near classified sniper systems." Still, she did not flinch. Her small, delicate fingers completed the disassembly of the Barrett's bolt carrier group in seconds. She laid each piece down with such symmetry that even the veterans among the crowd unconsciously leaned forward. A hush descended. The usual banter of operators, sharp jokes, rough laughter, evaporated. All that remained was the sound of the ocean faintly pounding against Coronado Beach and the metallic clicks of her precise movements. Morrison's rage burned hotter with each passing second. He had built his reputation on fear and control, and yet here was a woman half his size, ignoring his thunder like it was nothing more than weather. Her hazel eyes finally lifted, calm and steady, locking with his storm-gray glare. For a breathless moment, neither moved. Viewers, let me ask you this. Have you ever been judged instantly, dismissed because of how you looked, while the truth inside you told a story no one expected? That was Madison Parker, small, quiet, underestimated. And before this day ended, the men who mocked her would learn a truth they would never forget. Madison Parker had been on the base for 8 months. But in truth, she had never belonged. Officially, she was 26 years old, employed as a civilian maintenance contractor assigned to the Coronado Naval Amphibious Base. Her job was simple on paper: inspect, clean, and service weapons so that the men who carried them into battle would never face a malfunction at the wrong moment. She moved through her days like a shadow, quiet, efficient, invisible. Most of the operators barely noticed her. To them, she was just the maintenance girl, a background presence in faded coveralls that carried the permanent scent of gun oil. She came in early, carried her worn toolkit, and spent hours bent over rifles, carbines, and pistols. She asked for nothing, spoke little, and accepted that her presence in this brotherhood of steel and sweat was tolerated but never welcomed. She was small, delicate in build, her light brown hair streaked with natural blonde highlights from the California sun. The coveralls she wore, washed so many times they had lost their original color, hung loosely from her frame. She looked more like someone fit for tending flowers than dismantling rifles. Even her toolkit was unremarkable, dented from years of use, a silent testament to work done without recognition. And yet, there was something about her. The way she handled the weapons was different. Not the tentative fumbling of a civilian, not even the efficient checklists of a contractor, but something far more fluid. She moved with a quiet assurance, every part of her process exact, deliberate, and oddly graceful. Most dismissed it as dedication to her job. A few, however, watched more carefully. Commander Rick Morrison was not one of them. At 38, he was a 15-year veteran, a man carved from deployments and sharpened by the constant edge of war. His crew cut was already showing streaks of gray, his square jaw carrying the scars of both battle and arrogance. He was respected because he demanded respect, and feared because he thrived on intimidation. Morrison was the kind of leader who measured worth by toughness and loyalty, and to him, Madison Parker was neither. Around him orbited men of varying temperaments. Lieutenant Jake Torres, the youngest officer at 24, carried curiosity in his eyes and a mind that often questioned more than it should. Petty Officer Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez relished his nickname, 6'2", built like his title, a man who enjoyed crushing anyone smaller. And then there was Master Chief Pat Kelly, 22 years in uniform, his face weathered like carved stone. Kelly's quiet eyes missed nothing, and unlike the others, he studied Madison Parker with the caution of a man who sensed there was more beneath the surface. The morning's events had shattered her invisibility. For the first time, she was no longer background. She was center stage, locked in a silent duel with a commander who refused to be challenged. The operators leaned in, the air heavy with expectation. Viewers, if you're already feeling the tension coil tighter with every second, subscribe now for more hidden hero stories, because what Madison was about to reveal would change everything. The silence broke with nervous laughter. "Look at her," Rodriguez called from the back, his grin wide. "What's she gonna do, check for dust bunnies? Maybe polish the trigger with nail polish remover?" The younger operators chuckled, emboldened by their commander's glare. Morrison's jaw tightened. "Escort her out," he snapped, jerking his thumb toward the door. "I don't care what paperwork she has. Nobody touches our weapons without my say-so." But before anyone moved, Madison's hands kept gliding. Without lifting her eyes, she completed the Barrett's disassembly. Piece by piece, the massive rifle came apart under her fingers in less than 12 seconds. The bolt carrier, the firing pin, the recoil spring, laid in perfect order. Each component aligned with the kind of symmetry soldiers usually learned only after years of repetition. The room stilled. Madison finally spoke, her voice calm, even conversational. "The Barrett M82A1 has a maximum effective range of 1,800 meters, but with the right ammunition and proper environmental compensation, you can stretch that to 2,500. This one's fired roughly 2,000 rounds. You can see the wear pattern on the muzzle brake. Someone swapped the trigger group too, 3.5 pounds, not standard issue." The chuckles died. Several SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. Technical knowledge like that wasn't picked up from a manual or some maintenance checklist. It was the kind of insight you earned by living behind a rifle. Lieutenant Torres leaned forward, curiosity burning in his eyes. "How did you know that?" Madison looked up briefly, her hazel gaze steady. "I read the logs," Torres frowned. Maintenance logs didn't reveal such details, and they both knew it. Before he could push, Morrison's voice cut like steel. "Enough, you're wasting our time." He gestured to Rodriguez. "Get her out before she breaks something expensive." Tank Rodriguez stepped closer, the grin never leaving his face. "Come on, sweetheart. Time to go mop some floors." His hand reached for her arm. But Madison sidestepped, smooth and unhurried, as though avoiding contact was as natural as breathing. She set the Barrett's parts back in place with quiet efficiency. "With respect, Commander, these weapons won't pass inspection unless I finish." The veterans in the room shifted. They had seen enough to know this wasn't ordinary. Master Chief Kelly's eyes narrowed, studying her movements with the scrutiny of a man who'd spent decades spotting talent where others saw weakness. "Fine," Kelly said suddenly, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "If she thinks she knows our weapons, let's test her. Field strip and M4, blindfolded." The room erupted in laughter. Even the commander allowed himself a triumphant smirk. For seasoned SEALs, stripping a rifle blind was difficult. For a civilian maintenance worker, impossible. Madison stood slowly, her coveralls loose against her frame. "How much time?" 15 minutes, Kelly replied, her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "I'll take 5. The laughter came again, louder this time, but within minutes, silence consumed it. Blindfold secured, Madison's hands moved with impossible precision. Pins clicked, pieces separated, components aligned as if her fingers could see. In under 5 minutes, the rifle lay cleaned, reassembled, and ready. The veterans stared in disbelief. The younger men shifted uneasily. Morrison's face flushed with fury. Who was she? The tension in the armory was suffocating. Morrison's fury had reached a boiling point, but Master Chief Kelly raised a hand, silencing him. "There's one test that settles everything," he said, his gravelly voice calm yet cutting through the noise. "On the range. Standard sniper qualification, 800 meters prone position. If she's as skilled as she looks, she'll prove it there. If not, we'll know she's been bluffing." The room stirred with nervous anticipation. For civilians, even trained shooters, hitting a target at that distance bordered on fantasy. For Madison Parker, the test might have been a trap, yet she nodded without hesitation. "All right," she said quietly. Minutes later, the group clustered at the base's outdoor range, the Pacific wind carrying the faint tang of salt. Targets glimmered in the distance, white dots barely visible to the naked eye. Madison settled prone, her hand steady as she adjusted the bipod of the M24 sniper rifle. She worked the bolt, chambered a round, and exhaled slowly. The first shot cracked through the stillness. The electronic screen flickered, a clean hit in the 9-ring. Murmurs swept the crowd. Lucky, some whispered. But when her second shot landed even closer to center, the murmurs shifted into something heavier. Disbelief. Her third shot struck dead center. A perfect 10. By the fourth, the silence was absolute. Morrison himself stepped closer to the display, his face paling as the impossible scores scrolled across the monitor. "System malfunction," he muttered, but the range technician shook his head, and then came the final round. Madison adjusted the rifle, but instead of looking through the scope, she slid it aside and aligned the iron sights. Several SEALs gasped. At 800 meters, iron sights were a fool's gamble. She fired anyway. The monitor blinked. 10.0. The silence broke into stunned exclamations. Operators who had mocked her now stared wide-eyed. Kelly's weathered face betrayed awe. Even Torres, who had been curious rather than cruel, whispered, "That's impossible!" Morrison, humiliated, demanded answers. "Who are you?" His voice cracked under the weight of what he'd seen. Madison cleaned the rifle calmly, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She finally met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "Some of us," she said softly, "had different childhoods than others." The words chilled Torres. They weren't a boast. They were a confession. That night, base security pulled her file. Standard employment records were unremarkable. Civilian contractor, no criminal history. But when they dug deeper, the system froze. Access denied. Records sealed by executive order. Finally, one classified line appeared. Subject, Madison Parker. Status, deceased. Kia, Afghanistan, 2021. The officers stared at the screen in disbelief. If official records said she had been killed 3 years ago, then who was working among them now? Kelly's voice was grave when he read the deeper clearance notes aloud. Angel of Death, CIA Special Activities Division. 47 confirmed kills. Longest recorded sniper shot in history, 3,355 meters. The words hit the room like gunfire. The quiet maintenance worker was not who she claimed. She was one of the deadliest snipers the world had ever known. The lighthouse stood at the edge of the base like a lonely sentinel, its weathered stone rising against the backdrop of a restless Pacific. The sun had begun its slow descent, turning the sky into streaks of orange and crimson. It was there, on the narrow observation deck, that Commander Rick Morrison found Madison Parker. She sat on the ledge, legs dangling over the drop, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon. The ocean wind pulled at her hair, but she didn't move. For hours, she had been motionless, as though carved from the same stone as the tower beneath her. Morrison approached cautiously, his boots echoing up the winding staircase until he stepped into the open. "Miss Parker," he said quietly, careful not to intrude too close. "May I join you?" She didn't look at him, but after a moment she nodded faintly. He stayed a few feet away, respecting her space. The man who usually commanded rooms with thunder now spoke with uncharacteristic humility. "I owe you an apology," he began, "for doubting you, for threatening you, for treating you with less respect than you deserve." The ocean roared below, but Madison's voice was steady. "Your instincts weren't wrong, Commander. I don't belong here. Not with your men. Not in the civilian world either." Morrison frowned. "Then where do you belong?" For the first time, she turned to face him. Her eyes carried a weight that no 26-year-old should bear. "I used to belong with my team," she said softly. 6 of us. We were family in every way that mattered. Until one night in Afghanistan. An ambush. They died. I lived. And I've been trying to figure out why ever since." Her voice faltered just for a second, and Morrison understood. This wasn't just loss. It was survivor's guilt etched into her very being. "They called me the angel of death," she whispered bitterly. "I had the record shot. I carried missions no one will ever acknowledge. But when my team died, the angel died with them. What's left is just a woman trying to hide behind a toolbox and a set of coveralls." Morrison's chest tightened. For years he had believed strength came from domination, from fear. But the woman before him carried a strength far greater, the strength of living with unbearable ghosts. "I can't give you back what you lost," he admitted, his tone stripped of arrogance. "But I can tell you this. You're not alone. My men, myself, will respect you now. We'll honor what you've carried." She gave him a faint, almost weary smile. "Respect doesn't change the truth. My cover's gone. My quiet life is over. Some people never really leave the battlefield, Commander. They just change positions." The words lingered in the salty air, heavy and undeniable. Viewers, pause a moment. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy a part of yourself no one else knew? A truth you kept hidden because you feared no one would understand? That was Madison Parker, living proof that the battlefield isn't always left behind. Sometimes it walks beside you in silence. The night sky vibrated with the low thrum of rotor blades. A Black Hawk helicopter descended onto the base's landing pad, its searchlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. Operators paused their drills, faces lifting toward the sound. Morrison already knew it wasn't a routine visit. The side door swung open before the rotors had fully slowed. A man in a black suit and dark glasses stepped out, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He didn't wear a uniform, but every detail screamed authority. "The CIA had arrived. Where is she?" he demanded, his voice cold, cutting through the night air like glass. "We need to see the Angel of Death. Now!" The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. Some still didn't believe what they'd witnessed earlier at the range. But Morrison did. He'd seen her skill, her composure, the truth behind her quiet disguise. And as Madison stepped out of the shadows, walking toward the waiting officer, he caught the look in her eyes. She wasn't surprised. She had always known this moment would come. Morrison intercepted her halfway, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You don't have to go with them if you don't want to." Madison gave him a tired smile. "It doesn't work that way, Commander. Ghosts like me don't get choices. We get assignments." From her pocket, she pulled a small sealed envelope and pressed it into his hand. The wax bore no insignia, only her initials written in neat script. "For when you need to understand," she said softly. "The truth doesn't belong to me alone." Before he could respond, the CIA liaison snapped impatiently. "Let's move, Agent Parker." She turned away without protest, climbing into the helicopter with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. The rotors kicked up a storm of dust, and then she was gone, swallowed into the night sky. The operators watched in silence. Morrison remained still, the envelope burning in his grip, unease coiling deep in his gut. Something told him her reappearance was not the closing of a chapter, but the beginning of a darker story. 2 days later, news reached the base. The CIA officer who had escorted her back to headquarters was found dead in a D.C. safe house. No forced entry, no security breach, just silence. And Madison Parker vanished without a trace. Morrison stared at the envelope on his desk, unopened, its seal unbroken. He wondered if opening it would bring clarity or unleash something no one was prepared for. He wondered if Madison's words had been more than resignation, if they had been a warning. The narration settles into the air. "Some angels are too dangerous for heaven. and too necessary for Earth. Viewers, if this story shocked you, subscribe now for the next one about a janitor who turned out to be a Medal of Honor hero, and then silence. Heavy, unyielding silence.